everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of At the Boundary, the podcast from the Global and National Security Institute at the University of South Florida. I'm Jim Cardoso, Senior Director for GNSI and your host for At the Boundary. Today on the podcast, we're excited to bring back U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel J. Patrich. Jay is spending a year with us here at GNSI as the first member of GNSI's National Security Research Fellowship. The focus of his research aligns with his area of leadership and expertise in the Air Force, drones and autonomous warfare. He's currently finalizing a soon-to-be-published decision brief for GNSI that examines the high-risk, high-reward potential of drone operations as part of Special Operations Forces. He sat down with GNSI Strategy and Research Manager Dr. Tad Schnaufer to discuss that decision brief and his ongoing research.
Well, Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, you have an upcoming decision brief going to be published here with GNSI, and it covers a special operation drone doctrine and operations, and what that might look like for the future in a near-peer conflict. So why don't we begin at first, as we look at special operations forces and their use of drones, how does that compare to conventional forces and their use of drones? Where's the big difference here, and why focus on the special operations?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of similarities, obviously. I've been in special operations for 14 years or something like that now. I've been doing drone things the entire time. And I've seen sort of us progress from, we had MQ-1, that was basically a prototype that they fielded immediately just because the capability was critical, to the MQ-9, to RQ-4, all doing different kinds of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance missions.
And these are larger drones, right?
That's right.
For our audience who's not
so
familiar.
as we're progressing, it was primarily big capital fleet ship style drones, things that are theater level assets that geographic combatant commanders and task force commanders are managing, as opposed to something that's platoon or battalion level. We go, and they are doing a lot of work in the global war on terror, especially with respect to manhunting. And RQ4s are doing things like, characterizing IADs, all that. We go through, and we began working on smaller ones, right? Either anywhere from a handheld drone that someone can keep in a backpack to something that you keep that's 300, 400 pounds. You keep in Pelican cases. It uses, it requires a couple people to manage and set up and launch and maintain. And we start seeing these things progress. And then 2022 rolls around and Russia invades Ukraine. And I doubt that people fully understood the impact that small and medium-sized drones were going to have on that conflict. But people are studying it now for sure. And when we look at that, we didn't really, the Ukrainians and now to the Russians to a lesser extent are using them in novel ways that we weren't using them, especially from the Western, especially United States side. So we see them doing things to mitigate or basically go after the overmatch that the Russians had on their fifth-gen fighters, their large bomber fleet that the Ukrainians did not have. They're using smaller drones to keep those things either out of the fight entirely or keeping them farther away from the fight, reducing their utility, mitigating that advantage. So as we look, when we look at the state of today in the U.S., we have a significantly wide family of drones that the U.S. is employing, all the way from, Army company command, small handhelds that are used to look over the next ridge line, those kinds of things, short-range spotters for artillery, all the way to, we're still using MQ-9s, RQ-4s, and then the Air Force has the collaborative combat aircraft, which is a loyal wingman, AI-driven, effectively fighter plane that goes with the traditional man fighters. So I see advances happening, and as I reference in the upcoming work, I see a large amount of literature and research being done on the technical aspects of these drones. So how fast do they go? Are they vertical takeoff and landing, or do they require some other launch and recovery capability? What I don't see is a lot of creative research going into how might we use these in the future in a different way than we're using them right now. So there are some parts of the military, I think, that are facing a potential failure of imagination, right? So we have Group 3, which are the medium-sized drones that we can use. And we're making a lot of innovations on the technical aspects of those drones. What radio do they use? What munition can they carry? How quickly can we iterate on those machines? I'm not seeing us use those in ways that are different than we use the MQ-9 fleet that exists today. So we're making this incremental improvement to where we do the same job with a different tool as opposed to exploring what the new jobs are for the tools. And so back to your question, the difference between conventional and SOF, if you're asking about drone doctrine, there really isn't any. And I don't think that you necessarily need specific drone doctrine, but we need some sort of guidance policy on what we might want to achieve with these drones, as opposed to just getting better and newer technology to do old jobs. So, and I liken it to the business use of AI, which you're seeing some AI that is an interesting employment, some AI that organizes your calendar for you. And then like the rental car company will come out and be like, oh, we have our new AI capability. And I wonder, that's sort of what you see with drones. You see, these drones are the future. They're going to be critical in future conflicts. I need some drones. Get out there and buy some drones. But it's not, it doesn't come with, and here's how we will change the way we fight. Mm-hmm. So.
Right, so it's that imagination piece. And so you talked about the MQ-9, which is the Reaper drones, or the RQ-4, which is the Global Hawks. These are large, almost aircraft-sized drones, right?
They are larger than many aircraft, right?
So as they've gotten smaller, we still have those drones in operation in the U.S. Particularly, they're expensive, and we're a little bit risk averse with them. We're not willing to necessarily get those shot down in mass as you would have these smaller quadcopter drones, like in Ukraine, where both the Ukrainians and the Russians are producing millions a year. So, are you, recommending, or at least looking forward, seeing how the U.S. can acquire and then employ these smaller drones in mass? And in mass, we're talking about hundreds or thousands of them on the battlefield at one time.
I would say I would push back on our risk aversion to those platforms, because you can look at the Middle East, especially Yemen and the Red Sea, and see how many of those we've allowed to be shot down.
Sure.
And I would argue that they do have more risk tolerance because they view them in comparison to manned aircraft. Mm-hmm. To answer your question, am I looking into how we should get or develop these in mass? Mm-hmm. That is beyond the scope of the research that I intend to do. And that's just because, a simple search on any of the academic databases, you will find reams and reams of research advancing the generative manufacturing, advancing how we create and how we use these, how they are, how they swarm, how they interact with each other. So additionally, I don't know how to do those things. But I am interested more in, because all these people are doing all this great work, and all of these, hundreds of manufacturers in the United States and China and elsewhere are making better and better, more advanced drones. I'll just let them do that. Mm-hmm. But I do want to figure out, I don't want to miss an opportunity to innovate, right? I don't want to use aircraft carriers like battleships.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're doing in some ways. Mm-hmm. There are lots of advancements going, like I said, with collaborative combat aircraft, which I think is a critical capability, no criticism, but it is a new kind of fighter plane. And I see that there are many scenarios where we are using small drones to just look over the next ridgeline, or we use them in the same way that we would use any other guided munition, as opposed to something different like the way they are. So if the Ukrainians were just sending drones at just random targets, or using them like artillery, they probably would not have the same effect or the same success that they're seeing, because the Russians can just overpower them. It's a war of attrition at that point, but they're using them in new creative ways, which I think is really interesting.
Right. So what are some of these new creative ways you could imagine that these drones would be used, particularly, like we said, focusing on your decision brief, focusing on special operations forces or SOF?
Right. Yeah. So over the past 20 years or more now, we've been laser focused on the global war on terror. We've not had to deal with integrated air defense. We've not had to deal with a peer adversary. We've not had to deal with an enemy air force, any of those things. And I wonder, and I don't, I'm humble enough to admit that I don't know what the answer here, but I wonder if now is the time to start shifting special operations focus back to irregular warfare. I believe that some of that has occurred. If you look at SOCOM literature, they have a focus on campaigning now, which I think is a good step. And I wonder if there's more that can be done to move into that irregular warfare campaigning, especially across the special operations air forces in both USASOC, United States Army Special Operations Command, and AFSOC, the Air Force component to SOCOM. So I'm looking, what should we expect to do? You can also look at the Air Force, new One Air Force concept, their new force design structure. And it's broken into those mission areas. And mission area 1 has close in, under fire, moving. Who does that sound like to you? That sounds like Air Force, or it sounds like special operations operators. So I would ask then, what would they be expected to do? What effects would they be expected to create? Is this a soft seed scenario? Are we doing suppression of enemy air defense? Are we doing it in a new way? Are we empowering existing capabilities so that they can have effects that they weren't able to have before? Are they able to use small teams to make these operational level impacts? And you mentioned air superiority before. So SOF, you could say that SOF has no role in air superiority, and I would say that that's not accurate. I would say that they have a small role, but there are scenarios in which SOF's impact will be outsized, especially if we're considering pulsed operations, like the Chief of Staff of the Air Force talks about. People are no longer talking about like air superiority, air supremacy, like one would think about in Desert Storm, where we're the only one flying. We can do anything we want in the air. Nobody else can do anything. The adversary's got no play. We should expect to have moments of air superiority. We should expect to have areas that we have air superiority that are against another area where we don't have air superiority. So I think there's special operations role in that. I don't see us committing to just counterterrorism in the permissive environment and then irregular warfare. And then when major combat kicks off, us sitting on the sidelines going, you guys got it now. I don't think that's in the SOF DNA.
Well, and you mentioned, we should mention when we're talking about drones here, we're specifically focused on aerial drones.
In this case, for me, yes. But I think the lessons are the same.
Sure.
So if it's a maritime autonomous vehicle, I think they need to look at it and make sure that they're not just using it like a mine or a torpedo, that they're doing something different, especially within the realm of ISR or implanting cyber devices or, it's whatever is up to your imagination, I think.
Right. So like you said, trying to achieve different effects using drones as the instrument to do so. And one thing we're seeing with drones in Russia, Ukraine, is that most of them are happening in the air littoral space, this concept of air littoral. Could you describe what that space is?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what is that looking like in the next near peer conflict? Is that where a lot of the air combat's going to take place in this air littoral? To
answer your second question, I think the answer is yes. So this space cannot be ignored for any future fight. You can see it in Ukraine. To answer the first part of the question, the air littoral, I think, is a really good name for what we're describing. So you can look at the Navy. There's a blue water Navy out in the ocean, deep water, and you can equate that to high flying aircraft, bombers, fighters. And then there's the littoral Navy, which is just rivers and more shallow water, close to the shore. And we equate that effectively to a lot of people just use 10,000 feet and below, 10,000 feet down to the surface. And so if you look in Ukraine right now, the air littoral environment, 10,000 feet and below, is just buzzing with drones effectively all day. And those drones are doing different things. They're doing ISR. They are doing deep strike or strategic attack, we might say in doctrinal terms. And they're doing not air superiority, but air denial strategies to say, I'm facing a superior opponent, an opponent with far more and better aircraft than me, with an integrated air defense system that I don't have. So it is unlikely that I will be able to achieve air superiority over that opponent. So the best I can hope for is air denial, to say that if I can't use the air to go after you, you can't use the air to go after me. And that's sort of what I was mentioning at the beginning, where with enough drones and enough unpredictability, enough capability, you can go after aircraft that are on the ground. And a lot of people are doing a lot of research to deny this capability, but it is a real capability that people are having a really hard time with. Dealing with a drone swarm, they are hard to track. They don't necessarily emit if they're GPS only, if they're able to navigate that way. So these capabilities are really hard to deal with, and an aircraft is incredibly vulnerable on the ground. So that does things like make you move your strategic forces further away from the battlefield, which gives you logistical problems. It gives you time on target decrements or degradation. And even in some cases, if there's enough drones, the threat of collision could be enough to drive people further back from the forward line of troops and just create those strategic dilemmas for the adversary.
Right, because in the decision brief that will be coming out shortly, you discussed that but the Ukrainian attack on Russian aircraft on the ground, deep inside Russia. And this is an operation which soft forces would be particularly skilled and prepared for. So could you go into a little bit of how that attack inspired your work here?
Absolutely. So I'll admit to not being an expert on those. I've just read a lot of the similar things that everyone else has. But it was inspiring. And I was looking at, instead of just looking at the dollar amount of damage that was done, or thinking about where the Russians now have to move their strategic bomber fleet, making the adversary make choices that they don't want to. I was thinking more about the men and possibly women that accomplished that feat and what kind of people were they. And then I don't know if they, in Ukraine, they would consider those people special operations, but that is a very well-suited mission for United States Special Operations, who can maybe have language skills, who are moved forward, who are willing to be deep behind enemy lines or well past the forward line of troops, who can set up these things, and they can set them up in creative ways using the back of a truck where they're all docked and then they all activate at the same time. The roof of the truck retracts. They come out. They go after, they use $1,000 drones to go after $1 billion strategic bombers. And when I see that operation go off, I want to make sure that we don't miss out on the capabilities to pull off those big strategic wins with the small teams that just use boldness, creativity, do things in a different way using existing technology.
Right. So even in if there's a major peer-to-peer conflict, you could see these soft elements potentially operating deep within enemy territory with a large amount of small drones that can have, multi-billion-dollar effects on the enemy military infrastructure.
Absolutely. Or, it's that strategic attack that the United States could try to do those things with JASSMs. Right. But that's it's for lack of a word, a really good long range missile.
Okay.
They could use that, but perhaps those don't work, or perhaps the magazine of those strategic level assets is dwindling. Right. But we still can make quadcopters much faster than we can make high end missiles. So I can see special operations making those impacts. And perhaps it wasn't a strategic bomber fleet. Perhaps it was an area surveillance radar that allows the conventional forces to come in and get those moments of air superiority, to get those operational level wins that really can turn the tide. Either the strategic attack thing or the suppression of enemy air defense, like I mentioned with the air surveillance radar. Or I'm going to say right now that I don't know what it could be. I'm not sitting there reading adversary capabilities, but I want to make sure that we begin the different thought that it takes to move on from, I think they call it pathway dependence, right? So we have been using drones to do a couple things for a really long time, and we got good at it. And so when we continue to innovate with the smaller drones, they fly farther, they fly longer, they fly with beyond line of sight control, they fly with automation. I want to make sure that we don't use those innovations to get these incremental improvements on HVI hunting, right? And if there's nothing else for them to do, which I think is unlikely, then okay, we'll go back and get really, really good at HVI hunting so we don't have to use the very expensive MQ-9s.
HVI being high value
individual. Yeah. So finding those terrorist leaders, doing that counterinsurgency, going after old school Al-Qaeda people where they live to make sure that we don't have another 9/11, another Madrid subway bombing, keeping the pressure on those violent extremist organizations so that the conventional forces can turn their efforts to whatever the nation needs them to at the time, as opposed to spending our conventional forces times keeping pressure on violent extremist organizations.
Because we'll see that demand for both really continue, as you see in the Middle East now with these different Iranian proxy groups still operating there. And in some areas that are lacking governance, the resurgence of Islamic terrorist groups. But we also see the need for the near peer availability to deploy these teams forward deep behind enemy lines. And we're seeing also the defense piece of it. So we have this littoral aerospace, below 10,000 feet or whatever, however you want to define it. Even in Europe today, we had just the last couple of months, many European airports being shut down from drones, and they can't identify necessarily where they're coming from. Is it civilian drones, or those Russian agents, or those people that Russia has just paid to do this just to be disruptive? So what does that look like? Even maybe not even in a near peer war, but in this kind of hybrid war sense.
Yeah, I think that's very, very interesting. And I'm glad to say that part of the reason for my work in this upcoming decision brief is the acknowledgement that there are a lot of people working on that. When the small, we'll just call them smalls, when smalls became a really important national security issue, a lot of people started working on how to defend against these smalls. Do you jam them? Are there kinetic effects that we can take after them? And that's good. And the people who are working on it are the people probably that are most vulnerable to it. So the Army is very interested in not having grenades dropped on them by quadcopters.
Right.
And I totally understand. So since they are working on it, I wanted to focus on, okay, instead of defending against them, how will we, the U.S., use them and share that with our allies? Do we start doing aviation foreign internal defense again? So foreign internal defense is a core special operations activity where we go to a partner nation and help them build up resistance to whatever it is that is aligned with our national security objectives and our. So do we start doing aviation foreign internal defense for allied drone forces? And the most obvious choice for that would be Taiwan, right? So is that a new, I guess it wouldn't be new. Is that a mission that we should go back to? And I don't really know the answer. There are a lot of people who have a lot of thought on that and how expensive and how valuable it is. But those are the kinds of things that I want to explore. And that's really the purpose of this decision brief, is to pose questions for future research. And there's, I only get 10 months here. So there's likely not all I won't be able to get to all of those questions. And the people who have read it, I've gotten a lot of really good feedback, and there are parts in it that they say, I would just push back on this, or I disagree with this component, or I don't think this is going to pan out. And to that I say thank you and good, right? Because that's
Right.
this decision brief doesn't produce solutions or doesn't recommend actions for decision makers right now. I have more research that'll come subsequently to this, in which I'll hope to try to answer maybe one or two of the questions. Or at least get closer. Probably not answer, but.
Well, and one thing about this field, particularly since the war in Ukraine started, is the rapid evolution of it. So if you look at the drones that the Ukrainians and Russians were using at the beginning of the conflict in 2022 and how those have evolved, so you go from just basic quadcopters right off the shelf, and now they're being modified, greatly to now they're using, fiber optic cables so they cannot be jammed. So this is a field that's rapidly evolving. So your research would likely have to keep pace with it, nonetheless just catch up.
Well, I hope it keeps evolving, and that's an example of the creativity that I'm talking about with the Ukrainians, excuse me. And when I initially heard about drones dragging fiber optic cables, I thought, if somebody brought that to us, we'd say not in a million years.
Right.
But it is a tool that is solving a problem for them, either tactically or operationally. I want to make sure that we are in the same headspace to where we look at not just what technological solutions are available, but also what creative employment and I would say at the end of it, I talk about doctrine, organization, material. I don't think if we are going to use drones for more irregular warfare topics and major combat operations, I don't think that we're structured for that right now. We are set up to deploy forces based on the Global Force Management Allocation Plan that the Joint Chiefs put out. So in AFSOC, at least, we are set up very well to satisfy those requirements. And those requirements are almost exclusively counterinsurgency and counterterrorism requirements. So I don't get to make choices about what our priorities are. But if the priorities change to where we want to use the Special Operations Drone Forces to make irregular warfare contributions, I think that it is likely that we'll have to reorganize at least some way, especially if you want innovation to come out of the tactical level. Right now, there's not places or centers of excellence or anything like that do that advancement. It is done out of hide in addition to all of the training requirements and everything that it takes to go forward to satisfy that GIF map.
What's a GIF map?
The Global Force Management Allocation Plan. It's the Joint Chiefs plan of how we send forces places. In Ukraine, we've seen that the pressure, obviously, of the war, this existential threat, the rapid changing of the front lines at the beginning of the war, now a little bit more stagnant, that along with really a low sense of bureaucracy within the Ukrainian forces allowed them to adapt rapidly. So they weren't afraid in a sense of taking something off the shelf and adapting it. Obviously, the United States is a much more, bureaucratic structure for acquiring new technologies and then for fielding them and then for actually putting them in a front line unit. So do you see that possibly hindering this evolution maybe within the U.S. structure, or do we just need to be able to move faster? There's ups and downs to all of this, I think. And so the bureaucratic nature of what we've got right now has benefits. Everybody loves to rail against it, and I do too. But with the size of our enterprise, you can't exist without it. Thankfully, right now, we're not in major combat operations with a peer, which is why I think it's critical that we start working on this right now so that we don't have to figure out new tactics when we are under fire. I think Secretary Hegseth's memo about drone dominance that he put out a while ago is good, but that was actually one of the inspirations for this work as well. So in Secretary Hegseth's memo, I think it pushes some authority to make purchases, procurement in the bureaucratic terms, to buy drones down to the battalion level, which is the lieutenant colonel level. So these men and women have been in the Air Force or the Army for 16, 18, 19 years, something like that. They've been infantry officers, they've been armor officers, they've been artillery officers, what have you, special operations officers. What do they know about buying drones?
Mm-hmm.
What policy or guidance have they been given for what effects they are expected to achieve with these drones?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer, to my knowledge, is not much.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll get back on that pathway dependence thing, that failure of imagination. So if I'm a infantry battalion commander right now and I get the authority to buy some drones, I'm going to buy some long-range spotting drones. I'm going to ask if they have some that have kinetic capabilities for me to go after somebody who's holed up in a building or on the other side of something,
Mm-hmm.
or if I can't get artillery quickly, those kinds of things. So that's good because that person can use those for positive effects on the battlefield. But wouldn't it be better if they knew a little more about how drones might be employed, what the best practices are, and also, are there different effects that they are expected to achieve? Are they supposed to use their drone money for drone defense? Or are they supposed to be buying offensive drones? And I don't know the answers, and I wonder if they do.
No, it's interesting. And obviously with any new technology, there's a, learning curve there. And
Sure.
like you mentioned, your whole piece here looks to engage the decision makers in a sense of, we need to start thinking about this now, because you don't want to be trying to figure it out on the battlefield. It's better to figure it out at a combat training center at Fort Polk or out in the desert in California compared to actually doing it on the battlefield. So this implementation will be coming, but typically it's the pressure of the conflict, kind of going back to the Russia-Ukraine piece, that actually makes it happen.
It's the pressure of the conflict, or General McKenzie said it best. Sometimes it takes civilian leadership for us in the military to make big changes. And the one he referenced was Goldwater Nichols, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's any reason to think that military leaders in the 70s were interested in reorganizing and creating combatant commanders and creating SOCOM, those kinds of things. And it took civilian leadership. Right now, I don't know that there's any pressure for civilian leadership to make those choices, or that they even know that that's a choice that I think should be made. So I would be interested in who's thinking about that right now. Is anybody doing any work on this stuff? And I don't know the answer. And when this comes out, I would love to hear from some people who are working on this. I keep thinking that somebody's going to email me and tell me I'm an idiot, and people are working on this and we've got this capability already, which I would love to hear.
Well, we'll see about those emails.
I can't wait.
So one of the other points to note is that we've seen, obviously, the discussion of drones has been huge over the last few years, but the commander in the Pacific just a few months ago talked about if China was going to make a attack on Taiwan, they'd turn the Strait of Taiwan into a drone hellscape. Mm-hmm. So obviously there's this idea of just using drones in mass in future battlefields. Are you saying that soft forces would need to do anything different than that, or just?
I would say so. Soft doesn't often operate in mass. That's more for conventional forces. There are fewer of us. We're a smaller portion of the budget, especially when compared to the larger Air Force and the larger Army. So something like blunting the advance across the strait is, I'm sure that SOF will have a contribution, just because we're not going to sit on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. But that kind of thing is more a conventional. So I picture more if a longer conflict occurs, and making those small team insertions having effect, moving, getting out, or at least getting back, and then doing it again, reconstituting. And so right now, I don't know that we're set up for that kind of thing. I think that's what Mission Area 1 in the Air Force, in the new One Air Force force design, is describing, but they don't really say that. And they don't task AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command. They don't task AFSOC with anything differently. Neither has SOCOM. And so if SOCOM is interested in those capabilities, then I think that we should start working on them, as opposed to continuing to advance our abilities to go after a single terrorist leader or financier, things like that.
Right, because it's also a question of money, of using these large, expensive systems compared to, again, a couple $100, quadcopter that can operate in the littoral space. So it's kind of getting away from where the U.S. has been recently with being the most advanced technologically, which means very expensive and systems that you don't necessarily want to lose tons of them on the battlefield.
Right. I'll say that I am not advocating for going away from that. I think, we still need an F-35. We need an F-47. Sure. I wish they hadn't stopped making F-22s. Sequestration happened. And I would say that if we look at smalls, meaning like I'm thinking about group 1, 2, and 3, which means all the way from the handheld backpack carried drone to a 400, 700 pound vertical takeoff and landing quadcopter that's the size of a dining room table, right? And I think that you need that suite of capabilities because you don't know what the mission will be. There will be some things that will be appropriate for a handheld, hand-launched quadcopter. There's some things that will require more electricity, will require the capability to carry a larger munition, those kinds of things. So I think that it's important that we focus on that broader spectrum. And those group 3, the larger of the ones that can still be pretty expensive, but to the tune of like $700,000 as opposed to however much an F-35 costs.
Yes. So with all of that in mind, where do you want to take this research after this publication?
Yeah, thank you. I am working on an article right now that looks at sort of a little bit of the history of special operations innovation, that looks at what's happening in Ukraine right now and sort of moves forward with the concept that drones are important for regular warfare. And so I'm working on that paper right now. I hope to have that done this year. And then we'll look at the various venues to which we can try to get it published. So I'm going to more narrow focus on maybe one of the concepts and reference some of the other concepts. So focusing on irregular warfare, what that's like, what's going on in irregular warfare, what's been in the past, what's been going on, and then how drone forces could be employed in gray zone kind of irregular warfare stuff with reference to, and then if we ended up in major combat operations, here are some ways that they could be utilized, with the goal of saying, we need to continue to look at our force design. We need to look at how we innovate. Everybody wants to say innovation comes from the lowest level, or I've heard a lot of times like there's an airman in your formation who can innovate on these things. And they can innovate within their sphere, right? But we also need some policy, some guidance so that the day-to-day work of counterterrorism and all the other stuff that we end up doing doesn't have an outsized influence on the innovation work that we do, so that we can get off that pathway dependence and move to some more creative solutions for what our next conflict may look like.
Well, it's excellent. We look forward to seeing this decision brief published, and we'll keep an eye out for your other papers as they come out during your fellowship.
Yeah,
here.
Thank you.
Special thanks to our guest today, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel J. Patrich, GNSI's National Security Research Fellow, along with Dr. Tad Schnaufer, GNSI Strategy and Research Manager. Jay's upcoming decision brief, Developing Special Operations Drone Doctrine and Force Structures for Peer Conflict, will be published in the very near future. A couple other things to look ahead to. There's still space available at our upcoming conference at Port Tampa Bay. Port and Maritime Security, Risks and Resilience is the first event in the Florida Security Forum Conference Series. which focuses on national security issues with particular relevance to the state of Florida. Florida is a hub for defense, international commerce, and technological innovation, and plays an outsized role in shaping national security policy and decisions. This first conference will focus on Florida's deep-sea ports, their $117 billion annual economic impact on the state, as well as the nearly 1 million jobs supported by these ports. We're excited to partner with Port Tampa Bay for the event, which will be November 4th at Cruise Terminal 6. You can find the agenda and speaker information on our website. No cost to attend, but we do ask you to register in advance. In advance of the Florida Security Forum, Port Tampa Bay CEO Paul Anderson is featured on the latest episode of the GNSI video series. Paul has been CEO at Port Tampa Bay since 2012 and was instrumental in partnering with GNSI to host this upcoming event. We had a chance to talk with him about the ever-expanding security challenges that threaten Port Tampa Bay, as well as what he hopes people will learn from the Florida Security Forum. You can see that discussion on our YouTube channel. While you're there, go find the latest episodes of our GNSI research initiatives. Research fellow Dr. Arman Mahmoodian wrapped up Axis of Resistance with a sit-down interview with GNSI Executive Director, retired Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie. He commanded U.S. Central Command for 3 years and is the perfect guest to synthesize the excellent analysis across that series. Also, GNSI Senior Research Fellow Dr. Rob Burrell is building momentum on his research initiative, The Future of Warfare. His latest episode features a conversation with U.S. naval historian Craig Simmons, who's written 10 books and spent 30 years teaching at the Naval Academy. The two of them examine how tactics and strategies from the past, namely World War II, may be much more impactful than you'd think in our current relationships with pacing threats like China. Next week on the podcast, we look forward to welcoming the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command Central, Major General Jasper Jeffers. He oversees all special operations in the Middle East and Southwest Asia and will provide unique insight into the current state of affairs and his role in supporting America's interest in the region. If you don't want to miss that episode or any other, be sure to rate, subscribe, and let your friends and colleagues know. You can also follow along with GNSI on our LinkedIn and X accounts at USF_GNSI, and check out our website as well at usf.edu/GNSI. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. That's going to wrap up this episode of At the Boundary. Each new episode will feature global and national security issues we've found to be insightful, intriguing, maybe controversial, but overall, just worth talking about. I'm Jim Cardoso, and we'll see you at the Boundary.